So our first presenter is one of our student writers. So everybody please put your hands together and look up onto the stage for Grace Jackman, who's doing her poem. Look up.
All right, so my poem is called Look Up. Yeah, okay. At birth, we're each given a set of wings, but they're not for what you may think. They may not be visible, but they make every move, control every thought, and hold all the weight until you drop. There are dreamers carrying their whole weight in notebooks and thoughts hidden too deep to uncover. There are silent kids saving their words to fill up their minds at 2 a.m. to scream under the covers about everything that they did wrong. There are writers searching all night to find the right words, rereading the dictionary, only to come up empty-handed after tossing and turning through blank pages. There are music kids wanting to get the chills from the lyrics and not from others' expectations that are too high to reach. There are athletes spending their days training until collapsing, getting congratulated when reaching a finish line, yet waking up sore deep inside and ache no metal can heal. And then there's just people still searching for that person who will steady their wings and lift them up when they fall, never realizing that maybe they'll find them staring back in the mirror. We're never how we seem. Maybe it's because we're too inside of our own heads to realize it. Maybe you don't have to fly, but at least you need to own those wings, lift your head up once in a while, and realize that these others, while different from you, want to fold their wings when life feels heavy too. Because if we all looked up once in a while, we'd realize that none of us would be flying alone if we took that leap of faith. You may even catch someone else looking up too.
All right, so one of the big things that we want to do with Writers Expo is get students involved and sharing their writing. So thank you for giving Grace a round of applause. And Grace, thank you very much for volunteering to come up here. But we are going to switch gears now and go to the faculty part of the presentation. Now we're going to do something that hopefully you guys will have a little fun with. You're going to have to put on your detective hats, I suppose, and use all of your skills to figure out which of the following three teachers is going to tell you a lie. All right, so the way it works is called Two Truths and a Lie. Three teachers are going to come out. Each one's going to tell a story that'll be, 5-ish minutes or something like that. But one of these teachers is lying to you. So you need to use all of your deduction skills. All right, so let's bring out our three teachers. Come on out. I'll introduce you. All right, so we have, who's first? Ms. Tarczynski, Ms. Colombo, and Ms. Reifenberg. All right, I don't know who's going to go first. Do you guys want me to decide? Have you guys picked it out? I'm deciding. Okay, well, I'll decide then. All right, now let me tell you guys a little bit more about how this is going to work. So we'll have them each go. I think they're all going to read from here and share their stories. But you guys have to listen carefully because after each of the three has told the story, we open it up to you all, and you can ask questions and interrogate any or all three of these participants and ask them questions so you can try to dig in and figure out which one of them is lying. And then we take votes at the end, finally to reveal which one of them is the fake news faculty member. All right, so I guess Allison? I mean, Ms. Reifenberg, sorry.
No, it's all right. We are humans, we have personalities.
Yeah. All right, everybody put your hands together for Ms. Reifenberg.
All right, cool. So as I trudged home, boots crunching through the thin ice into the slush below, relief set in. I had just finished my last exam of the first semester of my sophomore year at Loyola University. I was excited to get to my phone that I had left on my note card strewn desk in my room in the off-campus apartment I shared with my two best friends. I wanted to call my mom before going to practice. With my mind on the workout coach had posted, I looked down the alley that took me to our back door. No way was I going to risk walking on that icy mess. I took the long way to the front. As I opened the door, my movement was cut abruptly short. Someone had put the chain lock on our door. Weird. Why would Ashley or Jen have done that? Whatever, I'll just go around, I guess. I pushed open the back gate with no issues. The lock hadn't worked all winter because of the ice. I walked up our back stairs and across the long shared porch. That's when a tall man walked out of my apartment. Hello? Who are you? The man was carrying a few bags. I live here, he said. It took a beat for me to register this. No, I live here? I live here, he insisted. I took a better look around, finally seeing the full picture. The bags he was holding were mine, my Loyola Women's Cross Country duffel, and my pillowcase, both full. His eyes were completely bloodshot. Our back door frame had huge gouges in it. About 15 of our personal luggage was piled full next to our door, and underneath that pile was my acoustic guitar in its soft case. Is that my guitar? I raged. Those are my bags. That's my pillowcase, man. He brusquely responded, these are my bags. To which I yelled, that one literally says Loyola Women's Cross Country on it. What are you talking about? He slurred his response that sure, that bag wasn't his, but this other one, my pillowcase, was his. He pushed past me on the skinny porch and I grabbed onto my pillowcase, seeing that my laptop and phone were some of the items inside. He yanked the pillowcase back and walked down the stairs. Instead of letting him go like a sane person would, I followed him into the alley where he was just nonchalantly walking away from me. I was incensed. What the heck? Give me my stuff. That was when a city streets and sanitation truck drove down the alley. I banged on the hood, yelling, he stole my stuff. They began chasing him in their truck. I took the opportunity to run back inside. I had to check on Willow, my roommate Ashley's Pomeranian Yorkie, who was afraid of her own shadow. Thankfully, she was still in her cage, though shaking. I had to contact the police, but this guy had taken my phone. So I ran back to campus to the athletic building and rushed into Coach's office. I quickly and emotionally told him what happened. Instead of calling the police, dude called campus security. By the time they picked me up in their golf cart, the police had already apprehended the man, who had apparently pulled a knife on the streets and sanitation guys. At the police station, they showed me the file they had on this guy. He was known as the Rogers Park burglar, and his file was 2 huge binders large. It took hours for my roommates to find out. Apparently, Coach didn't think to tell them that their apartment had been burglarized until after their run and in the middle of lifting in the weight room. They ran to the police station, arriving the same time as my dad, who took us all back with our things to our apartment. One of the craziest parts of the whole ordeal was that when my roommates and I finally went through our bags, we saw he had tried to take literally everything, including used razors and bar soap. He had also trashed our place, having ripped open and exploding my roommate's bag of Chicago-style popcorn all over the kitchen floor. While I would tell my younger self to please just get out of this guy's way, that he could have hurt me, that I was truly lucky that nothing bad happened, it does make for a good story.
All right, you'll be able to interrogate her later, but first we have 2 more participants. All right, let's have Ms. Tarczynski come up and share her story. And if you decide to ask her a question later and you're not sure you can pronounce Tarczynski, I think you can just call her Tarz. It'll be all right. Yeah? Okay. All right, here you go.
All right, so there's a line in The Great Gatsby that I've always loved. Jordan says to Gatsby, and I like large parties. They're so intimate. At small parties, there isn't any privacy. The paradoxical nature of the line creates a thrill of truthiness in me, even though I personally don't like large parties. I'm a watcher by nature, not a participator. But the nature of small parties, or even small towns, boy, I'm astounded by the speed with which news travels in a small town. Libertyville is not what I'd call a small town, but rather a close-knit town. Many people know others, then others know others, a kind of 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon sort of thing. But my first actual teaching job in Yorkville, Illinois, with a town of 5,000 people in 1995, I could not believe how little privacy there was. I could go into detail about how when I went to the mom and pop grocery store 2 weeks before class started, and the teenage kid behind the counter looked at my driver's license as I paid with the check, then looked at me, looked at the license again and said, "Oh, you're the new English teacher at the high school." What? Seriously? How do you know who I am? I've been in this town for 2 weeks. I mean, the switch from MS-DOS to Windows 95 occurred when Microsoft released the new OS on August 24th, 1995, so it wasn't like you could just look someone up on the internet at that time. There was a lack of privacy in that town. And then there was the day that the blizzard had begun, and I was at the post office a few weeks before Christmas. Only limited parallel parking was available across the street from the tiny and classically ancient post office. There was no room for a lot. The train tracks ran parallel to the post office with just enough room to make on-street parking parallel to the tracks. No curbs, as this was a rural area, so it was just gravel, dirt, and then tracks. The snow caused whiteout conditions. Had it been a weekday, school would have been called off. But as it was early December, I needed to get my stuff out despite the snow. Driving up the tight road, I lucked out a spot on the street. I'm not so great at parallel parking, if you are, and I wanted to make sure that there was enough road for the other drivers, on the one-way road. I did my best to parallel park, but I managed to hit a pothole and the car went ka-thunk, jostling up and down. Whoops, I thought, and then went to mail my packages. In the post office, there were two guys that looked like construction workers chatting with the postal clerk. I smiled, said hello, waited my turn, gave the packages to the postal worker, paid, and left with a goodbye. I got into my car and tried to back out. The car's wheels spun. I thought the car wouldn't move because I was stuck in that dang pothole. I got out, grabbed a little shovel that was in the back, and started shoveling at the snow. Back wheel first, no pothole. Front wheel, and it hadn't been a pothole. I had parallel parked too far onto the gravel shoulder, even past it. I managed to hook my right side passenger tire over the railroad track. That's right, my car was partially on the track and very stuck. I tried not to panic. No cell phones yet, so I decided to rely on the kindness of strangers. Hopefully the construction workers would still be there and would have an idea. I ran into the post office, wildly explaining the situation to the two burly construction workers. Behind me, another man came in, a fairly tall black man in a smart-looking coat. The construction workers laughed at me a little, and I was truly embarrassed, that damn damsel in distress thing that I really hated. But they good-naturedly went outside with me to help. One of them shoveled at the front tire, the other was in the back trying to rock the car back and forth as I gunned the accelerator. The smartly dressed man came out to watch, but then started hollering at us. We looked up at him to see him pointing into the distance, which is when we saw the train. A train. My car was going to be demolished by a train. The smartly dressed man, Don was his name, went back into the post office for a moment, and 3 postal workers came out with him. One had what looked like a red sweater and a flashlight. Don took the sweater and the flashlight and got up on the track using them to get the train engineer's attention. The men decided that they were going to have to lift the front of the car back over the track. Everyone was experiencing an adrenaline rush as if it were their own car in danger, and I was just standing on the sideline in quiet shock. The train slowed, flicked its beams, and then stopped about 20 yards from Don. As the train was stopping with a 1, 2, 3, the 4 men, 2 on the front bumper, 2 squatting alongside the passenger door with straps and hooks and facing away from the car, managed to somehow raise and shift and slide the car just enough so that the tire rested on the rail. Then they shoved the area just above and below the passenger's side view mirror, creating a small dent in the car, but sliding the car. I'll take a dent over a demolished car any day. Ka-thunk. The car was back over the track and everyone was exhausted but relieved. Don waited until I slowly idled away from the tracks before moving off. I'm sure he ruined what looked like Italian leather shoes that day. Crying, I gave him a hug, and everyone else too. I thanked everyone again and again, but also silently promised myself that I'd never show my face again in that post office due to my embarrassment. However, when I got to school Monday, you know it. Everyone had heard about the story. My embarrassment for something so foolish was spread all across the school without the aid of Snapchat, and likely because some of those men were the fathers of students. They knew, and I knew, and I had to survive that embarrassment throughout the week and longer, but it was well worth it at that time for the incredible power of kindness. Small towns, small parties, no privacy. Now we have cameras everywhere, whether it's phones, Insta, Ring doorbells, or outdoor cameras, or indoor cameras. And the world has now become a much more open place, so much smaller than before. And honestly, I'm still a little afraid for my privacy once again.
All right, one more contestant, and then we will have you guys, do some interrogation here. So if you could put your hands together and welcome our friend, Ms. Colombo. Come on.
Many sayings that are commonplace in English now are actually attributed to the late, great William Shakespeare. All that glitters is not gold, green-eyed monster, wear your heart on your sleeve are some of his iconic examples. But one quote that particularly hits close to home for me is, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." This line hails from Romeo and Juliet, when Juliet implores for Romeo to not care about their respective family affiliations and the implications of their love. In today's tale of star-crossed lovers, I am not going to proclaim to be Juliet, nor paint my husband as Romeo. Our love story is not the yarn that I weave here today. Rather, it's the significance of my last name, Colombo, which of course I took when I married my husband, little knowing all it would entail. Well, that's not entirely true. I did know that there was a TV show in the 70s that bore my future surname, Colombo. The famous Lieutenant Colombo would go around with an "aw, geez, golly shucks" manner, seemingly clueless, but it was all just an act. This detective was astute and all-seeing. He could zero in on the slightest of details and use it to crack the case. This leads me to the second major detail of my last name. Colombo is Italian. Ever hear of Christopher Columbus? Yep, in Italian, he was Cristoforo Colombo. He was a pretty big deal. We even celebrate a holiday in his honor. So I married into that lineage. How far down my husband's family tree he is connected to that famous explorer, neither of us knows, but the man who crossed the ocean blue is not a large factor in today's tale. My dear audience, today's tale of my last name is going to be related to the mob, the mafia, the Cosa Nostra. I'm still hazy in all the details, but this I know for a fact. My husband is a relative of the Colombo crime family, one of the 5 mafia families that run New York City. In the 1920s, the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, and Colombo families all divided up New York City into their respective territories, in which they controlled, racketeered, and money laundered, when not outfitting people with cement shoes so they could sleep with the fishes. They are still in operation today, 100 years later. My father-in-law passed away before I even met my husband, and he didn't like to talk about the New York family. There is only one anecdote about a great uncle who owned an apple orchard in Brooklyn, who sold things that fell off the back of a truck. That's really all my husband ever shared with me. That and the time his father told him he could never, ever go to Italy. So guess where we honeymooned? Yep, Italy. How we landed there is another story altogether, but I did ask my husband before we booked the trip if it was okay. He shrugged, and I figured he knew best, so 4 nights in Italy and 4 nights in Germany were booked in the blink of an eye. Our honeymoon came, and we arrived bleary-eyed and exhausted to Milan, Italy's 2nd largest city. Check-in for our hotel was at 4 p.m., and we had landed around 11. With the jet lag, we were exhausted and had nothing but time to kill until we could collapse into a siesta in the hotel. Bored and weary, we had a long, lingering lunch, enjoying the flavors and people watching that Italy affords. When it came time to pay the bill, my husband pulled out his credit card, and at that moment, our troubles began. The waiter read my husband's name, James Matthew Colombo, on the card, and you could tell that we were obviously Americans, so he asked if we were related to Marcello Colombo. The name didn't ring a bell, and we expressed as much. However, I could tell that a dynamic had shifted. Our previously friendly waiter became quite cold and succinct when we wrapped up the bill and left the restaurant. I discounted my feelings and chalked it up to being exhausted. We made our way to the hotel and had an uneventful evening. The next day, however, we rented a car so we could drive to Lake Como, and things began getting weird. Upon checking at the rental car agency, I noticed a man in a fedora hat and dark sunglasses standing behind us. I initially didn't think much of it. That's a standard look in Italy. We got a rental car without issue, and off we went. As we got on the highway, I noticed a similar-looking man from the agency driving a Mercedes behind us. Again, I didn't think much of it. It's like a uniform in Italy. About 90 minutes later, we were in the beautiful town of Como, with the waters of the lake lapping at the shore. We found a cute lakeside restaurant and dug into a delicious meal. I recall glancing over casually to look at the sidewalk, and there he was. And this time there was no doubt. The man in the fedora and sunglasses was also in Como. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck start to rise. It's like that feeling when you realize you're being watched, except it was hard to tell if his gaze was directed our way because of those sunglasses. We wrapped up lunch and paid in cash this time and went for a walk to see the town. The man in the fedora followed us, but at a distance. He was trying to give us a wide berth, and I was also trying to not stare. We ambled around town for well over an hour. He never got close to us, but he also never left our sight. At one point, I decided to tell my husband, and he told me that he noticed him too. He didn't want to scare me, but he had an uneasy feeling the moment we were asked about Marcello Colombo by the waiter in Milan. We hurriedly rushed back to our rental car and made our way to our Airbnb. Again, it was another uneventful night. The next day, we wanted to explore Lake Como, which is fairly vast, with several picturesque towns dotting the coastline. We decided that we would go to Bellagio, which was purported to be the most charming lake town of them all. Getting there, however, required taking an hour-long ferry from downtown Como to the docks of Bellagio. We both anxiously scanned the crowd, and we didn't see our friend. I remember my husband squeezing my hand. We were in the clear. We took our seats on the deck, and while my husband went to go get refreshments, I spotted him. My heart sank. But there he was, Mr. Fedora in sunglasses, talking away on his cell phone. How could this be? Why was this man everywhere we were? My husband returned our drinks, and he could tell by the look on my face. He was back. He patted my knee and softly reassured me. Everything was fine. We hadn't done anything wrong, and maybe he was a tourist taking in the same sights we were. I wanted to believe my husband so badly, but my gut was telling me otherwise. We were being followed, and it was all because of some mafioso named Marcello Colombo, somewhere back in New York City. I shan't bore you with the rest of the sightings of Mr. Fedora. They were all pretty much the same. We got followed by him in Bellagio when we went to Verona the next day, and when we traveled 4 hours to the far north of Italy to a town called Bolzano. At one point, my husband called his mother, begging for any details about his dad and the New York Colombos. She couldn't shed any light. My late father-in-law was tight-lipped. We finally got rid of Mr. Fedora when we returned the rental car in Bolzano, Italy, and boarded a train for Munich, Germany. My last sighting of him was around 9 a.m. when we went for coffee in the train station. What Mr. Fedora wanted from us, we will never know. Whoever Marcello Colombo is, quite frankly, I don't want to know. Till this day, I have never been tempted to research him. He and Mr. Fedora were the third and fourth wheels on our honeymoon, casting a shadow over a special time for a new couple. I love Italy, and I would enjoy going back one day with our daughter. But quite frankly, unless we pay with everything in cash to keep our last name low profile, that's not going to happen. So, arrivederci, Italy, until we meet again.
Okay, so at this point, you guys can start asking questions. And just raise your hand and shout it out. And if you need to, I can repeat the question so that everybody can hear it. And you guys have a microphone? Do they work?
I don't know. It
But
does.
they do. That one does. Okay. All right. So now, just like the great TV show Colombo, you guys have to be detectives. But let's go right into the attack. So what you guys want to do is start asking questions. Figure out which one of them is the liar. So let's begin. Who'd like to start? There we go. Get it started. Thank you, Ann.
All right, Tarczynski, what was the make and model of the car and what color was it?
It was a Subaru, and it was, I don't know, it was probably, I can tell you that it was a Outback, but it didn't actually have the Outback label on it because it was before they did that. And it was from my parents. I didn't actually buy the car. And it was olive green.
All right. Does that pass the test? All right. Let's come up with another question. Who do you think is lying? And then see if you can capture them in the lie. See what they cannot answer, or at least not answer to your satisfaction, because you can tell they're just making it up. There we go. Thank you.
For Mrs. Colombo, what was like the color of the fedora and the clothes that the guy was wearing?
The fedora was navy blue, and the sunglasses were just like the black, like aviators. I don't remember what he was wearing. He just looked like an Italian man in a fedora and sunglasses. But I do distinctly remember those two details.
Oh, in the back. Sorry. Go ahead.
Colombo, what color shoes was the guy wearing?
I don't remember what shoes I wore yesterday, so I can't remember. No clue.
Anybody? Miss LeMaistry?
Reifenberg, what happened to the Rogers Park burglar?
So I was called to testify, but then I didn't need to go because he had so many other people willing to testify. I was really reluctant to go. I could tell this guy was like really struggling and I didn't want to be part of that. But then I luckily didn't have to. So yeah, I think he's in jail.
Tiana, did you have a question?
Yeah, when did you go to Italy?
I went when I got married in the year 2016, June specifically, and then we went to Germany and came back in early July.
More questions? We can do the voting whenever you guys want, but like if you feel like you can capture somebody in a lie, you know, it's kind of fun to be like, nailed them. Okay, yeah, in the back.
I'm just curious, Miss Colombo, why didn't you call the cops?
Well, for a couple reasons. He didn't do anything. He was just there where we were. And we don't speak Italian. And if we called the cops with like two Americans, like, oh, somebody's following us, I think we would have gotten laughed at. So he didn't.
All right, are we ready to vote, or is there someone else out there with a question? All right. Yeah, that's it? Okay, so we're going to do a raise of hands to figure out like who the majority thinks is the liar, that kind of thing. So here goes. You only get one vote, okay? Let's see how it goes. We had Ms. Reifenberg go first. So if you think that she is the liar, and this Rogers Park thing just never happened, raise your hand. Ooh, it's only a few people. Okay, all right. A couple more hands came up. All right, next we had Tars with her amazing story about how she can't drive. If you think that is true, Sorry. Go ahead and raise your hand if you think she's the liar. Ooh, I think maybe a few more there. Okay. And last but certainly not least, we have Mrs. Colombo. And, ooh, that's a lot. Okay. All right. So let's figure it out. Okay. We're going to ask the liar to stand up and reveal themselves. So, answer. Okay. Quite a few of you figured it out, so congratulations. We'd ask you all to stay up here for a bit. Mr. Tooley is going to share some of his work, and then after that, if there's time, we'll ask some questions about how you wrote your stories, or Ms. Colombo, how you came up with a so rather convincing lie. So thank you. If you guys can just stay up here for a few minutes, that's great. And Matt, here's your mic.
All right, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Not very good. All right. Well, we'll see what we can do about that throughout the day. Does anybody feel like sometimes they do actually want to write creatively, but they don't necessarily know where to start? No. Does anybody feel like they have more of an analytical mind than they do a creative mind?
Yes.
Okay, one person. I'm glad that there's like 3 or 4 alive. This is good. Great audience. Okay, how about books that you read when you were a kid, but they're still very meaningful to you, and you feel like they actually kind of influenced you a little bit? Anybody have that? Yeah? Okay. Anybody like doing word puzzles? Yes. Okay, all right, so this might be for you then. I always get inspired by Writers Expo and always have felt like I want to write, but sometimes I get overwhelmed by the sheer number of options available to you when you sit down to write, especially if it's going to be creative writing. Like, do you do a story, do you do a poem, and if you do either one of those things, where do you begin, where do you go? A bunch of years back, one of my colleagues was doing this activity with his students where they had to go into The Great Gatsby, they had to find words and phrases that they liked, and then they had to turn it into a poem using those words and other words. And I thought, this is really cool. I'd like to do something with that, I think, but I wanted to make it a little bit more personal and a little bit more meaningful. So what I decided to do was, instead of just taking words from one book, which I kind of feared it might end up, like if you're using The Great Gatsby, just sounding kind of like F. Scott Fitzgerald, I decided, let me take words from a bunch of books. And I decided, I don't even really remember why don't I come up with a list of 16 books that I read before the age of 16 that I feel are influential to me, meaningful to me, that have stuck with me in some way, shape, or form. And I came up with this list. I tried not to overthink it, because that's a tendency I have. I don't know if this is necessarily the top 16 books that were most influential for me of the ones I read as a kid. But these were the 16 books that I decided to pull some words from in order to write a poem. But then what words to choose, right? Every book has thousands of words. You could spend months pulling words from 16 different books. So the idea that occurred to me in terms of how I could make this a little bit more personal, I took my birthday, September 12th, 1979, and of course any birthday you can break down numerically, right? And I essentially came up with 4 numbers, 9, 12, 19, and 79. And then, and this is where people are probably like, you're really nerding out here, sort of, yes. I went to each of the books, and I went to the first page, and I counted what's the 9th, what's the 12th, what's the 19th, and the 79th word from each of these books. Here's the first page from A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle, and those became 4 of what turned out to be 64 words that I had to work with, okay? Once I saw the list, all the words, there are a few things that occurred to me. First thing that occurred to me was that 4 of the words I had pulled were actually names of characters in the books. Margaret, Sam, Peter, James, possessive too, up at the top. And I was kind of like, shoot. Like, what do you do with concrete names? How can you be creative with those? And how can I write a personal poem using those particular words? And it occurred to me, well, wait a minute, if the basis of all of this was works of literature that were meaningful to me, that I read as a kid, what if I just wrote a poem about how meaningful the literature we read as kids can be in our life, a sort of homage, if you will, to all these 16 books. And I thought, yeah, that could totally work. The only thing was Peter. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is undoubtedly an influential book in my life. The problem is I don't like the Chronicles of Narnia. I think, personally, C.S. Lewis is a highly overrated writer of fiction. And I didn't want people to think that it was a more important book to me than it actually is, and I was afraid that, people might see that and just assume certain things. So I was really curious what I was going to do with that. I decided it was time for some rules. Rule number 1, I had to use every single one of these 64 words. But if it was a word like the, which popped up 4 times, I only had to use it once. I could use it no more than 4 times, but I had to use it at least once. And then I decided I could punctuate the poem however I wanted. I could use the space bar however I wanted. And I decided, well, if a poem is essentially, oftentimes, a combination of sentences, and some of these are going to be the first word of a sentence, and I'm going to have to capitalize a letter from that word, then if I can capitalize something, I decided I'm going to get to decapitalize too. Because I noticed that the name Peter is also an English word, meaning to fade out, to diminish. And that gave me a little bit more flexibility. So I then printed out all the words and cut them up. We had this massive box that my wife had ordered something in. And I just decided this will be a great little container where I can move all the little words around like you do those magnets on the fridge you sometimes see at people's houses. Now, this is actually my second attempt. These are a completely different set of words. But I basically, over the course of a couple weeks, at my dining room table, whenever I had a few minutes, just kind of played around and, saw what kind of came to me, how I could make these words into phrases and sentences and try and communicate my thoughts and feelings about the literature I read as a kid. And eventually, I did, after a couple weeks, come up with this. So the title of the poem, which also acts as a sort of first line of the poem, is Sam, Margaret, and James's Page. Sam, Margaret, and James's page, every one, was my own. His, her, their quilt, there about me like summer. But it didn't peter, as sunsets had. Nothing died, started to blister. It's breakfast, through, but in. The very ground now, that of an old wood, it towers on. Even the small, the least, will affront time. Thank you. Thank you. And part of the reason why I really wanted to share this with you guys was because if you have more of an analytical mind, if you like word puzzles, if you don't think you're necessarily a creative person, I gotta admit, I'm kind of proud of it. I'm proud that I put in the time and the work and I came up with this, and it is something very meaningful to me. It can be done, okay? And you can make it your own, right? You can take this idea, run with it, change it, do whatever you want, and you might end up with something that, you can be proud to share with people. I'll turn it back over to Mr. Schmidt. If you guys have, questions for any of the 4 of us, I believe that's where we're going with this.
Yeah, I believe we only have about 4 more minutes. So if anyone does have a question for anybody about how they wrote their bit, raise your hand and I'll call on you. Otherwise, I'll just ask them a few questions myself. But I'll keep looking out here in case anybody asks a question. All right, so I'm going to ask this of the crowd, and then any one of you can answer. But how did you select the idea for your story? And Matt, you've already kind of told us how you did yours, but for the 3 people who did the 2 Truths and a Lie, how did you come up with the germ of your idea? Why did you select that thing? What about it did you think would be captivating, and how did you pull that off?
Well, my story is 75% true. My husband is a Colombo from New York with the mob ties. That is not a lie. But I did this with Mrs. Tarczynski last March, and wait, who told the lie? Yeah, we both told truths. Never mind. She told the lie. So I was inspired to tell a lie, and my father-in-law did tell my husband to never go to Italy, and we did. And that's where the germ began. I also have a Sicilian uncle named Marcello, and I thought that was a really good combo of names, Marcello-Colombo. So the lie basically began in Milan, where we paid with a credit card. That never happened. But that was fun. I like that creative process, and I like feeling like I feel like the back of my brain like start clicking and turning, and yeah, that's what I was able to do.
All right, I think we only have about 1 more minute. Does anyone else have a question out there? Okay. Really quickly, how do you sell your story? Well, you're trying to convince them that you're telling the truth, and some of you were telling the truth, but like, how did you decide, well, this will convince them, this will make them believe that I'm the truth teller?
It was a little difficult because I feel like I'm a better liar than I'm a truth teller, and I was trying to get as much detail in there to make it interesting, but at the same time, not too much detail to make it true. So it's a kind of a tightrope walk to do it. And I think I probably put way too much truth detail in there, as far as detail that would identify that it was true. But then again, a lot of details creative writing, so who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I put in a lot of like personal details, like about my roommate's dog, and because she was a really important part of my college experience. And I think like hinting that like there was more to the story, like at the end. I don't know. I guess just like picking specific details, like it was my duffel bag and it was my pillowcase, and how wild that was. Yeah.
Yeah, for those of you that want to know how to lie, let me give you a quick tip. Include details. If you have details, you'll be able to fool your parents more easily, okay? Please, learn to tell stories. Learn to lie. You'll get to have more fun in life and get your way more often.
It doesn't work with teachers as much.
It does not work with teachers. It never has, and it never will. But learning to lie is actually a pretty good skill to have.